Hey folks, we're going to do a little bit of review before we start on our heat transfer notes for today. This is reviewing page 11, which we did in class last week. Page 11 started off by talking about how heat always transfers from whatever's hot to whatever's cold. And remember, all cold is low thermal energy. The particles are moving slower, it's lost its heat, and we know that heat always transfers from whatever is hotter to whatever is colder. We did a couple examples of that. For instance, if I was eating ice cream and my mouth was warm and the ice cream is cold, I would say heat transfers from the ice cream. Oh no, ooh, good catch. Heat transfers from my mouth, which is hot, to the ice cream, which is cold. Now, it won't happen forever. They'll stop transferring heat when they're at the same temperature. And that is equilibrium, when two temperatures are equal. Well, we already knew that, and we reviewed it the other day too. We took a couple examples. We looked at conductors and insulators. Conductors let energy pass through easily, things like metal. Insulators slow down energy. They prevent or stop energy from passing through. And there are some examples up there. And we did a couple things with conductors, insulators, and transferring energy. But today we got to look at something that you guys might have heard last year. Most classes said that they did this in the past. So this is old information. If it's new to you, we will be looking over it again together. We'll be reviewing it as a whole. There are also some additional resources on helpful links if you need them. So today we're talking conduction, convection, and radiation. You will be filling out page 12 of your notes. Page 12 of your notes. Now, at any point, you can pause this video to write things down so you don't have to write while I'm talking. You can go back and rewatch things. That's the magic of doing this way. All right, so I'm going to give you guys some definitions or descriptions of these heat transfer things. And then we'll look at a few examples and we'll talk about some pictures or symbols you can use. The first type of heat transfer is the one we've been talking about a lot. Most of the examples I gave talked about conduction. Yeah, most of them are about conduction. Conduction is the transfer of thermal energy by direct contact. And that's a fancy way of saying two things are touching. Conduction is when two things exchange heat because they're touching each other. Convection is a little bit different. It usually happens in gases or liquids. And when a gas or a liquid starts to heat up, it tends to rise to the top or float to the top. And cold fluids tend to fall or sink to the bottom. So for example, if I was boiling water, the hot water will rise to the top, the cold water will sink to the bottom, and it will create a little cycle. So convection is the transfer of thermal energy in a moving gas or a liquid, and it's a cycle where hot fluids rise, cold fluids sink. The last one we'll talk about is radiation. That's the transfer of thermal energy by using electromagnetic waves. Electromagnetic waves is a big chunky word, but if you break up electromagnetic, you can kind of see what it's about. Electro for electrons or electricity. Magnetic, like a magnet. Waves, like waves. Now, electromagnetic waves are something that we're going to learn a little bit more about as time goes on. So if you just remember the word waves, you're okay. But if you don't, if you remember the word electromagnetic, good for you. And if you remember that infrared waves are the ones that usually carry heat, that's even better. The wave that usually carries heat is an electromagnetic wave called an infrared wave. Now, In the examples, we might see some examples of infrared waves that you're like, oh yeah, I know all about that. All right, so you can pause this to get these copied down if you need to. Otherwise, let's roll into a couple examples. Conduction. See over here, I got a picture of a person grabbing a hot pan. This person probably did not think before they did that. As soon as they touch the hot pan, how is the heat transferring? Well, we know it's going from hot to cold. Well, in this case, the pan is hot, the hand is cold, so the heat is going from the pan to the hand. And this is conduction because they are touching each other. Now, what other examples of conduction can you think of? Any example where two things are touching each other could probably be a good example. You could say frying an egg on the pan would be conduction because the egg is touching the pan. You could say that holding an ice cube would be conduction because the energy is going from your hand to the ice cube because they're touching. It's all about two things touching each other. Putting an ice cube in a glass of water could be conduction because the water is touching the ice cube. Now, if you would take a minute, you can draw this if you're a good artist. If you're more like me, you're probably going to do more of a symbol. What kind of picture or symbol can you use to help you remember conduction? On to convection. Convection is one that we'll talk about a little bit later in the year because it turns out that this is a common example of something that happens inside the Earth. This is convection because there is a cycle. A cycle is a circular motion. There's a cycle in a gas or a liquid. In this case, it looks like it's boiling water. So the convection current, you see hot water rises to the top. Cold water sinks to the bottom, and it makes this little convection current or convection cycle. And don't get excited, that was on the recording. I'm recording at 3:24 p.m., so clearly the bell is ringing. It's not 3:24 for you guys, just keep on taking these notes. All right, so you see the word density up here, or dense? We're going to come back to that later. But convection is a cycle where hot rises, cold sinks. Oh, sorry. I was also going to say, what other examples of convection can you think of? If this can happen in water, could it also happen in air? If y'all studied weather before, you might know that hot air would rise up, cold air would sink to the bottom, and it could create some weather patterns as well. And some of you guys already know about the layers of the Earth. In the bottom layers of the Earth, it's a lot hotter, and there tends to be these convection currents. If you're having trouble coming up with an example, you can use this pot of water as an example. And for a picture, I would always include this little circular one arrow going up, one arrow going down. All right, now for radiation. Radiation is when heat transfers without touching, without solids, liquids, gases. It goes through without having to deal with matter at all because it's getting there through energy waves. Now, we haven't talked about energy waves as of yet, and that's going to be something we talk about in the next few weeks. But if you're trying to think of good examples of radiation, think about a time where you're feeling heat because you're not touching it, you're not feeling air moving, but you still feel that heat kind of radiating off of it. If you take a look at the picture here, little fluffums, you can tell that some parts are hotter than others. This is an infrared camera, and it's measuring the infrared waves.